Somewhere beneath a mountain on the coast of Sicily, the old stories say, a monster still lies buried, and even now, when the ground trembles and fire spills from the peak above, people call it the breath of the beast trapped underneath. What could possibly be dangerous enough that the king of the gods needed help just to survive it? This is the story of Typhon, the most fearsome creature the ancient world ever imagined. A monster so vast that the old poets said his outstretched hands could touch the sunrise in the east and the sunset in the west at the same moment. 100 serpent heads roaring from his shoulders, enough raw power in his body to send the gods of Olympus running for their lives. Gaia, the earth herself, made him in fury after watching her own Titan children chained forever in the darkness below the world. She wanted one being terrible enough to end the reign of Zeus before it had properly begun. What followed was the single greatest battle in Greek mythology, a war that split mountains, boiled seas, and very nearly cost Zeus his throne, his strength, and his life. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps this channel, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in and meet the monster the earth built to destroy a god. The war that made Zeus king of the gods was called the Titanomachy, 10 brutal years of fighting between the young Olympians and the elder Titans who had ruled before them. Zeus won it, and when the fighting ended, he did something that Gaia could not forgive. He took the defeated Titans, her own children, born from her own body at the beginning of the world, and cast them down into Tartarus, the black pit beneath the underworld, sealing them there behind walls of bronze. Gaia had wanted her children punished perhaps, but not buried forever in darkness. According to the oldest tellings, grief hardened into fury, and fury hardened into a plan. Deep within Tartarus itself, Gaia joined with the primeval darkness that ruled there, and from that union she conceived one final child, a child meant not to inherit the world, but to take it back by force. She carried the pregnancy in secret somewhere in the wild hill country of Cilicia, in a cave the locals would later call the Carishian Cave, and when her time finally came, the earth itself is said to have groaned with the birth. What emerged from that cave was unlike anything that had walked the world before or has walked it since. Hesiod, writing centuries before the Common Era, called him the most terrible monster ever born of Gaia, and even the gods, watching from the safety of Olympus, understood at once what kind of trouble had just entered the world. No single description of Typhon agrees on every detail, because no single mind could hold the whole of him at once. The oldest accounts say he was so tall that his head brushed the stars, and so wide that when he stood upright and stretched out his arms, one hand reached the far eastern edge of the world while the other reached the western edge, where the sun goes down. From his shoulders rose not one head but 100, each shaped like the head of a serpent or a dragon, and from every mouth came fire, not a figure of speech, the old writers insisted, but real flame, bursting from 100 throats at once until the sky above him glowed orange with it. His eyes burned the same way, flashing fire whenever he was angry, which was always. Where his legs should have been, coiling vipers writhed instead, hissing and thrashing with every step, so that the ground beneath him seemed alive with snakes. His voice, or rather his 100 voices, could imitate almost anything. One head might bellow like a bull, another shriek like a hawk, another howl like a wolf, another speak in a voice the gods themselves would recognize, so a listener could never be certain whether the sound rolling toward them across a mountainside was Typhon or something entirely ordinary. Vast black wings, wide enough to blot out the sun when spread, rose from his back. What kind of god could possibly stand against something like that? He was not simply large. He was chaos, given a body, sent into the world for one purpose only. When Typhon rose from the Cilician cave and started toward Olympus, panic did something that had never happened before. It emptied the halls of heaven. The Olympians, who had just spent 10 years fighting and beating the Titans, took one look at what Gaia had sent against them and fled. Not Zeus, not yet, but every other god and goddess of that young and frightened court. According to the story the Romans later told, the the gods raced south across the sea to Egypt, and there, terrified that even the edge of the world would not hide them from a monster whose hands could reach either horizon, they disguised themselves as animals. Zeus is said to have taken the shape of a ram. Apollo became a crow. Dionysus took the form of a goat, Hera a white cow, and Hermes borrowed the sharp beak and quick wings of an ibis. Later writers claimed this single desperate afternoon was the reason Egyptian gods were so often shown with the heads of animals, a memory, passed down and half forgotten, of the day the gods of Olympus had to hide like frightened animals themselves. It was, by any measure, the lowest moment the Olympians had ever faced. The Titans had been dangerous, but organized, predictable, a war fought on familiar terms. Typhon was something else entirely, a force so overwhelming that the rulers of the sky abandoned their thrones rather than face him, leaving only one god standing between the monster and the throne of heaven. Zeus did not run. Whatever fear passed through him at the sight of Typhon, he turned instead toward the monster striding up out of Cilicia and did the only thing a god of the sky truly knew how to do: he attacked. Thunderbolts fell by the dozen, bolt after bolt screaming down out of a clear sky to strike Typhon's 100 heads, and for a moment it seemed to work. Hesiod says the monster's flesh caught fire under the barrage, and the whole earth blazed with the heat of it. Zeus also carried into that fight an adamantine sickle, a curved blade harder than any metal known to mortals, and he pressed the attack close, hoping to end the war for the sky in one decisive strike. The battle that followed did not stay confined to a single place. The old poets describe the ground itself heaving beneath the two combatants, mountain ranges cracking apart as though struck by hammers, rivers boiling in their beds, and the sea churning so violently that fish and the great creatures of the deep fled toward the shore in terror. Smoke and ash rose so high that the sun itself seemed to dim over the battlefield. It was less a fight between two beings than a collision between two forces of nature, sky against earth, order against chaos, and for a long while neither side could say which one was winning. Then Typhon, wounded and enraged, did something no enemy Zeus had ever faced before had managed to do. He closed the distance and wrapped Zeus in the crushing coil of his own serpent legs, pinning the god of thunder against the mountainside with a strength no Titan had ever possessed. In the struggle, Typhon wrenched the great sickle from Zeus's own hand, and with it he did something no story before or since had dared do to the king of the gods. He left Zeus unable to move, the strength drained entirely from his limbs, as helpless on that mountainside as any mortal man. The old sources are careful here, almost reluctant to say too much, but the sense of what happened is unmistakable. The god who ruled the sky was rendered powerless, stripped of the very ability to fight back or even stand upright. Typhon carried what he had taken to a hidden cave in Cilicia, the same wild country where he himself had been born, and sealed it away inside the skin of a bear, guarded night and day by a fearsome she-dragon named Delphine, coiled in the dark at the mouth of the cave. For a time, the old writers never agree on how long, whether days or weeks or longer, the throne of Olympus stood empty of its rightful power. Zeus lay defeated in a country far from his mountain, and Typhon, believing the war already won, turned his attention toward claiming the sky for himself. The rule of the Olympians, which had seemed so secure only a season before, now hung by the thinnest possible thread. It was not another god of thunder or war who saved the sky that season, but two of the quieter, cleverer gods of Olympus, Hermes, the swift messenger and master thief, and Pan, the goat-legged god of wild places, sometimes called Aegipan in the old tellings. Together they made their way to the hidden cave in Cilicia, moving carefully past the coils of Delphine, and where brute strength had already failed, cunning succeeded instead. Some versions say Pan startled the dragoness with a sudden terrible cry, the very kind of sound that gave the world the word panic. Others say Hermes simply outwitted her with the same quick hands that had stolen cattle from Apollo when he was barely a day old. Either way, The two gods found what Typhon had hidden, freed it from its wrapping, and carried it swiftly back across the sea to where Zeus lay. The moment his strength returned to him, Zeus rose from that mountainside a changed god, not merely healed, but furious in a way none of the Olympians had ever witnessed before. He had been humbled, merely conquered, forced to depend on the courage of two lesser gods simply to survive. Whatever mercy he might once have felt toward Typhon was gone entirely. He gathered his thunderbolts, mounted a chariot drawn by winged horses, and set out once more to finish the war. A monster born of the earth's own fury had started. Would it be enough this time to end it for good? The final chase carried the two of them across half the known world. Some old accounts say Zeus caught up to Typhon in Thrace, near a mountain that came to be called Hemus, where the fighting was so fierce that blood, or something the poets treated as blood, is said to have stained the slopes and given the mountain its name. Typhon, wounded and desperate, fled south again, tearing across the sea toward Sicily, with Zeus close behind him, thunderbolt after thunderbolt scorching the ground the monster crossed. On the island of Sicily, Zeus finally caught him. There would be no third act of cunning this time, no stolen strength, no clever trick to even the odds. Zeus simply overwhelmed him, striking with everything the sky god possessed until Typhon, the most fearsome creature the earth had ever produced, collapsed beneath the weight of the assault. Then Zeus did something fitting for a god of that scale of power. Rather than simply ending the monster and walking away, he tore a mountain from the earth itself and brought it down on top of Typhon's ruined body, pinning him beneath it forever. That mountain still stands. The Greeks called it Etna, and it stands there today on the eastern coast of Sicily, known now by nearly the same name, Mount Etna, one of the most active volcanoes on the face of the earth. The old writers were certain they knew why. Deep beneath that mountain, they said, Typhon still lies buried, still alive in some fashion, still burning with fury at his defeat, and every tremor in the ground, every plume of smoke, every river of molten rock spilling down its slopes, is Typhon, straining uselessly against the weight of the mountain. The king of the gods dropped on him. The story of Typhon sits at the center of Greek mythology for a reason. Every other monster Zeus faced in his long reign was dangerous, but Typhon was different, a being created for the single purpose of ending the rule of the Olympians before it had truly begun, and for one terrifying stretch of the story, it very nearly worked. Even the king of the gods, wielder of the thunderbolt, could be caught, weakened, and left utterly helpless, saved only by the courage of two smaller gods willing to walk into a dragon's cave on his behalf. There is something honest in that detail that a simpler myth would have left out. The Greeks did not tell a story where their strongest god effortlessly crushed every threat that came against him. They told one where he nearly lost everything and needed help to win it back. And around that story, they built an explanation for the world itself. A volcano that rumbles and burns because a defeated monster still strains beneath it, unable to rise, unable to die, forever paying for a war. His own mother started out of grief and fury. It is a story about how close order came to being undone by chaos, and about the strange comfort of believing that even the wildest, most destructive forces of nature have a reason behind them, a monster with a name pinned beneath a mountain by a god who very nearly lost everything to put him there. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe, and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.